put a post up on Instagram and I made the title of it, Why Didn't Anyone Tell Me? Why didn't anyone tell me that when I was pregnant, I should be considering the function of my pelvic floor? Why didn't anybody tell me that when I worked out throughout my pregnancy, that those tight muscles I was creating in the pelvic floor would make it so I couldn't deliver naturally and end up with a C-section? Why didn't anyone tell me leading up to delivery that I should think about relaxing my pelvic floor and working on hip opener exercises? Why didn't anyone tell me that at that 6-week postpartum checkup with my doctor wasn't a ticket to jump back into exercise full force and that I need to ease back into it and consider rehabbing my pelvic floor? Why didn't anybody tell me that no symptoms doesn't mean no problem, especially as I'm getting older? Why doesn't anyone tell me that leaking, prolapse, low back pain, and hip pain can arise simply from me just getting older? Why didn't anybody tell me that leaking is common but not normal and there are solutions so I don't have to live with this? Why didn't anybody tell me that after a bladder sling surgery or hysterectomy that I still should be working on my pelvic floor function? Why didn't anybody tell me that there are solutions to my leaking, prolapse, and pain? That I should be proactive throughout my life in connecting in with my pelvic floor function? Why didn't anybody tell me there's pelvic floor physical therapists? Why didn't anybody tell me that pelvic floor exercise rehab and considering my pelvic floor and exercise and movement can help either prevent or eliminate these issues? My name is Krista Dennett. Since January 2014, I've been specializing in pelvic floor exercise rehab. These whys that I've just mentioned, some are mine, many are from women that I've spoken to and worked with over the last 6+ years. What I'm about to share with you right now is my opinion. This is my perspective of what I've experienced personally and what I've seen over the years when it comes to women's bodies, specifically in pregnancy, postpartum, and as we age. What I feel is missing is a basic need and help for women, especially women after they've had babies, especially as they age. We are responsible for continuing human life on this planet. Why are we left to struggle with these life-altering issues and we're not told that they could happen, that they may exist, that there are solutions? First and foremost, if you are experiencing incontinence of any form, stress urinary incontinence or urge incontinence, if you're feeling pressure on your pelvic floor or know you have a prolapse, if you're struggling with abdominal separation that's not healing in postpartum, if you have painful intercourse, if you're having any kind of symptoms like that, I do highly suggest you speak to a medical professional or a pelvic floor physiotherapist for help. My perspective in this video is what I've seen over the years of women working with pelvic floor physiotherapy and integrating pelvic floor exercise rehab as a strategy and tool to help eliminate these life-altering issues. So here's something that I really don't understand. I don't understand why they don't tell us these things. I don't understand why when I was pregnant, no one said, hey, just so you know, there's all this pressure that's being put on your pelvic floor and the muscles are gonna get weak and your abdominals are separating and that connective tissue that holds your abdominals together is getting paper thin. There are things that you need to do in pregnancy that will help prevent certain things from happening. Why didn't anybody tell me this? Why didn't anybody tell me that after I had that C-section, what actually happens to my body so that I know how I have to heal? Why didn't anybody tell me that after having my second and third child naturally, that it's still like having surgery and I shouldn't rush back into life and I should look at a healing strategy? You know, we don't go and have knee surgery or any other kind of surgery without a strategy for healing from that surgery. Pregnancy and delivery should be exactly the same. The other thing I don't understand is why is no one making it very clear that as a woman ages, hormonal changes naturally cause the pelvic floor muscles to weaken. I guess one of the main reasons why we don't talk about it is we don't want to instill fear. And that I understand. I understand the need of not creating alarm bells. And I don't blame the doctors for not saying anything, because simply our medical system in Canada is a reactive system. So unless we have a symptom or a problem and we bring it to the doctor, then we're not going to get treatment. And usually that treatment is prescribing medication or surgery, because for the most part, that's what's covered under our basic medical plan. Something like physical therapy is usually only covered when we have extended benefits. And even then, we usually have a cap on how much we can spend towards that service. So it makes sense that that is not necessarily the avenue they want to take us, because what if we have no problems? Then are we okay? But as I've seen over the years, even without symptoms in immediate postpartum, I've had women come to me a year later and they all of a sudden just were making a fast movement and pop, their pelvic floor was weak and there goes their bladder. I've had other women in their 50s who had nothing leading up to that point, and then all of a sudden they're having issues with leaking and pain that never existed before. So I think what this comes down to is deciding what is important enough for us to understand so we can manage the risk. It really comes down to risk management. It comes down to understanding our pelvic floor function so that we can make informed decisions on how we want to approach dealing with our bodies, either before pregnancy, in pregnancy, postpartum, and beyond. In my opinion, I feel like we should explain what common symptoms can arise as a result of weakening of the pelvic floor. What is wrong to say the pelvic floor weakens in pregnancy? The pelvic floor weakens when we're overweight or obese. The pelvic floor weakens when we sit for long periods of time or stand for long periods of time. And I don't mean just weakens, it becomes non-functional. So it may hold tension, but it still may be weak. Why aren't we told that leaking is a pelvic floor dysfunction? Prolapse of the pelvic organs is a pelvic floor dysfunction. Abdominal separation, diastasis recti that's not healing, is a pelvic floor dysfunction. Low back pain and hip pain, or you may hear SI joint pain or pubic symphysis dysfunction. Those are symptoms of pelvic floor dysfunction. Hypertonic pelvic floor, that tight pelvic floor, or also known as vaginismus, that is a type of pelvic floor dysfunction. So why aren't we just given that list and say, hey, this is what can happen when there is weakness or imbalances in the muscles and a lack of function of our inner core. So here's what you can do to prevent it. Wouldn't that make all the difference for us? When we have no symptoms and we work on maintaining our pelvic function, most of the time, everything goes great. But it's that hard balance between the exercises like medication. I'm not having symptoms. Do I still take the medication? And then I stop the medication and then the symptoms start to happen. And then once those symptoms start to happen and we let them go for too long and we don't try to take care of it, then new symptoms arise, more issues happen, long-term imbalances are created in the muscle system. So an example would be maybe you have some mild leaking, but what you don't know is that underlying mild leaking is also the start of a prolapse. And then you let that go on and then all of a sudden you have a bladder that is sitting on your pelvic floor area and you're feeling that pressure. I want to take a moment quickly just to share with you what I mean when I talk about the pelvic floor and the inner core team. The inner core team of muscles is the pelvic floor at the bottom, the diaphragm at the top, the transverse abdominals, they wrap around us like a corset. They're the deep internal abdominal muscles. And then these muscles up our spine known as the multifidus. They're like an inner canister. They're responsible for maintaining continence. They're responsible for holding inner pelvic organs. They're responsible for maintaining stability and anticipating movement and for sexual function. So the pelvic floor is a nice round bowl, and as you can see, it's holding in all of our pelvic organs. I'm going to take out the uterus and take out the bladder and take out the rectum. So you can see it's multi-layers of muscle that are responsible for holding in those pelvic organs, maintaining continence. They lengthen and shorten in anticipation of movement. They lengthen and shorten when we have to go to the bathroom. They can become tense, and that is known as hypertonicity. That's where they're holding tension. But as soon as we let go of that tension, then they are weak, or they can be weak. And that leads to other issues as well. Pregnancy, overweight or obesity, heavy lifting, sitting for long periods of time, standing for long periods of time, and injury, age. These are just some of the ways that this inner core team can get into a position where they're struggling to work, and therefore they weaken, and that is known as pelvic floor dysfunction. That inner core team of muscles, that inner canister, works best when there is ideal alignment of the body, coordination with breath, and putting that all together with movement. When they're compromised, they get exhausted or they become tense. When that happens, other muscles start to take over. Something else has to help maintain our continence. Something else has to keep us stable. Something else has to anticipate movement. That is what creates muscular imbalances. That is what leads to stress urinary incontinence or urge incontinence. It leads to, with the weakening of the pelvic floor, the pelvic organs descending, known as pelvic organ prolapse. It prevents our abdominal separation from healing. It creates low back and hip pain, or SI joint pain, or pubic symphysis dysfunction. It creates hypertonicity or vaginismus. Here's the truth of the matter, though. There's no quick fix. There's no magic pill. There's no magic one movement that you can do that will make this all go away. The best way to manage the risk of pelvic floor dysfunction, or to help eliminate pelvic floor dysfunction, is to consider the following. See a pelvic floor physical therapist if you can. Understand the function of your inner core and pelvic floor in general, as you age, in pregnancy, in postpartum, or even if you're engaging in an activity that sees you doing heavy lifting, or what happens to your inner core and pelvic floor when you do sit for those long periods of time at work, when you are standing for long periods of time. If you have symptoms, ask questions. Learn about it, understand it. Don't be fearful of it. The more you know, the better you will be at making informed choices and understanding what, for example, pelvic floor exercise rehab will help do to heal from those issues. Do your pelvic floor exercise work. Trust me. But it isn't just sitting there and doing your Kegels. And in fact, there's a little bit of buzz going on lately now about Kegels aren't always the answer. That is true, but it's also not true. Kegels aren't the answer if you have a hypertonic pelvic floor. But as soon as we release that tension, we need to make sure they're functioning, so Kegels are important. It's a balance. All right, I get this question a lot. Who needs to check in with their pelvic floor function? Okay, this is what my answer is. Anyone who walks, anyone who stands up, anyone who carries groceries, anyone who's had a baby, anyone who's getting older, anyone who exercises, anyone who runs, anyone who sits for long periods of time, anyone who stands for long periods of time, anyone who lifts heavy things. The list goes on. So pretty much everyone. The other question I get is, when should you see a pelvic floor physical therapist? First of all, please note that a pelvic floor physical therapist is a physical therapist that has additional training to perform internal exams, because that is the best way to understand the function of your pelvic floor. It's good to go in and just have a checkup to make sure that everything's functioning, even if you haven't had a baby. Go see that pelvic floor physical therapist when you're pregnant. We usually recommend start seeing one in the second trimester. Not only are they going to help you maintain that function of your pelvic floor through pregnancy, but they're also going to give you strategies for birth. See a pelvic floor physical therapist after your checkup with your doctor in postpartum, and see a pelvic floor physical therapist as maintenance once a year as you age. The next question is, when should I be focusing on pelvic floor exercise movements, and how long am I going to have to do this for? Okay, the first part of that question. When should you focus on connecting with your pelvic floor in just daily movement, even in sitting here, or in exercise? Before you have a baby, while you're pregnant, in postpartum, as you age, if you like to walk, if you like to sit, if you like to carry groceries, not that anybody likes to carry groceries, if you like to run, if you like to work out, if you like to lift heavy things, we all need to learn how to connect to that pelvic floor. We need to learn how to feel for contraction as well as relaxation. The second part of that question is, how long will I have to obsess over this? I don't want anyone to obsess over what's happening with their pelvic floor, because sometimes what happens is we get so intense, and I've seen this happen, I want to contract, that we create hypertonicity, we create that tension. Once we have learned about our dysfunction, once we have learned the tools and the movements and worked on the exercises to help heal from those dysfunctions, once we get to a point where we're now managed or eliminate the symptoms that we're feeling, then we want to make sure that they never come back again. So what can we do? Check in with your pelvic floor throughout the day. Maybe you're sitting and do some Kegels there. Can you feel for relaxation? Can you feel for connection? In your exercise, make sure that they're functioning. You don't have to make sure that they're contracting at every single repetition you're doing, because they are already working, because they're anticipating your movement and they're maintaining your stability. But checking in to make sure that they're not just loosely hanging out there is a good idea. The other thing that I recommend is address natural muscular imbalances that creep up throughout the day. We do find ourselves sitting for long periods of time for work and whatnot. Or maybe you are standing and sitting throughout the day, but natural muscle imbalances occur. A muscle imbalance, for example, would be simply feeling like, oh, this side's tighter than this side. That means that something is overworking and something is underworking. So we want to look at relaxing the common muscles that overwork when that inner core is getting tired throughout the day. So as simple as 5 to 10 minutes of just addressing the muscle imbalances before we go to bed is perfect. Now, the choice of movements for exercise rehab with respect to pelvic floor dysfunction and the educational piece will vary depending on what your symptoms are. For example, in the starting process of pelvic floor exercise rehab, the movement practices that I would give to someone who has no symptoms and just working on pelvic function would greatly differ from someone who's dealing with hypertonicity, diastasis, and leaking. Since May of 2019, I have been doing pelvic floor exercise rehab in a clinic under the guidance of pelvic floor physical therapists. And what is becoming more and more clear is not one strategy and not one movement is necessarily the right thing for everyone. We need to have a toolbox of strategies and movements. And that really has guided my focus on even the self-directed programs that I put online, is we want to make it symptom-based, because there's an educational piece and there is a movement piece that we need to adapt based on the symptoms that we're experiencing. It's my job to take care of the movement piece as the tool to help women address and eliminate pelvic floor dysfunction. And I can honestly say that over the years, incorporating alignment, breath, pelvic floor contraction in movement, even if it's just functional daily movement, has made all the difference in helping women rid themselves of these life-altering issues that really do encompass our mind and our body every day. When we're having these issues, we are constantly thinking about them. And when we're constantly thinking about something that is negative, where do we go? We go down. I've seen a lot of negative feelings and almost depression-like symptoms from women as a result of these issues that are going on. When there are answers out there, when there are tools out there, when there is help out there, we shouldn't have to live like this anymore. And that's what I'm hoping this video and many more videos that I do will help us all understand. I know these feelings all too well. Having 3 children of my own, having my own issues with dysfunction, it's been a journey, but I can tell you this. I am much more aware and understanding about how my body works. When I'm sitting for long periods of time in the day working, I know what my body needs. When I'm going to do exercise, I know what my body needs. I know how to nourish my mind and my body and help that connection stay intact so that the goal is to no longer deal with life-altering issues, to not have those issues creep up in life with me as I age. At 46 years old, I feel like I have the most understanding of my body, and I have the tools available to make sure that I can go into the second half of life with ease in movement. So what is the process? What is the process when it comes to exercise rehab? I simplify it like this so everybody can understand. It's a two-part process in the initial stages of rehabbing from a pelvic floor dysfunction symptom, or just learning about our pelvic function and implementing it into our day-to-day movement. Release and retrain are the two focuses of my initial pelvic floor exercise rehab process. Release the muscles that are overworking and taking over for the weakness of that inner core. Then we can focus on retraining our feeling of alignment, retraining our breath, retraining how our pelvic floor contracts, and applying that all to movement. That might sound like a lot, but let me tell you this. The mind and the body are absolutely extraordinary. What we're retraining them to do is what they're born to do. With the mind and the right guidance, the body will adapt exactly to where we want it to be. I really hope this information helps women as a whole stop having to ask, why didn't anyone tell me? What I want to reiterate is this is not meant to make you afraid. This is to provide you with valuable information so you can make the right choices for your body, whether it's risk management so that you don't have the onset of a situation, or you know how to deal with it and you're not overwhelmed with thinking it's the end of the world. There is help, there are solutions, there are strategies for you. I would love to hear your thoughts. Let me know your what if someone had told me this? What would I have done differently? Why didn't anyone tell me this? Put your comments below, because your words, your experiences will help other women realize that they're not alone and that there is help out there for us. Because at the end of the day, we deserve to no longer live with these life-altering issues. We deserve to move with ease. We deserve to have answers. We deserve to understand how our body functions and the risk management when it comes to pregnancy, postpartum, and age. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel too. Thanks for watching.